hearing it from the beginning again.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm just going to say a quick hello. We've had some technical issues with Junction Read's season opener, but we're just going to pop right in to Katie Welch reading from her incredible novel, Mad Honey from Wolsak and Wynn. Katie.
Thank you very much, Allison. I'm going to begin with a scene where Beck Wise, Melissa's boyfriend, has just returned. Her father had disappeared when she was 11, and it had been very difficult for her, but she'd gotten down to work as a way of coping with her grief. And now her boyfriend and beekeeper Beck Wise has been missing for 3 months. And I'm going to begin with a scene where he has returned with a very bizarre explanation for his absence. The front doors of the farmhouse opened and spilled a rectangular carpet of light onto the lawn. Beck padded out barefoot and closed the doors gently, pitching the porch back into silver semi-darkness. He sat on the other end of the couch and stared into the night, his black eyes insect-wide, reflecting pale half circles and pinpoints, moon and stars. Melissa wanted to stay angry with him. She wanted to shout at him for leaving, then coming back to lie about it. But she also wanted him to put his arms around her, nuzzle her hair, cover her hands with his, and press unspoken promises that he would stay into her flesh. Do you remember when I first told you about the waggle dance? He asked. It was a strange question, but she remembered. She accessed the memory whole, like the plot of a favorite movie. It was another summer night, a starry one. Holding hands, they'd gone for a walk along the gravel road, heading south away from Lanark, warm wind like tender fingers brushing their skin. An owl had swooped over fields beside the road, sound of its soft hoot, glimpse of its flat, menacing white face. A childish euphoria had engulfed Melissa, and impulsively she'd pulled Beck close, hummed an invented waltz, and entreated him to dance. She had worn a soft, pale green cotton dress, she remembered, he a hippie shirt and baggy hemp pants. In shadows, they could have been dressed for a formal event. Sandal-shod feet had crunched on a makeshift ballroom floor. Beck had gotten into it, taken up the melody, spun her around. The dance had ended with a passionate kiss. Honeybees dance, you know, Beck had said. Sure they do. You've never heard of the waggle dance? Waggle dance? Now I know you're fibbing. Well, I'm not. It's how the worker bees tell each other about juicy patches of nectar. They orient their bodies in relation to the sun. They point their hairy little butts however many degrees left or right of the sun's position a bee would need to turn herself to fly out and find a feast of flowers. That's not dancing, that's rotating. I'm not finished. The dancing bee waggles her hind section super fast and moves in a figure 8. The length of the dance is in direct proportion to how far the nectar mother lode is found. I've never heard of dancing bees. There are more things in heaven and hell than are dreamed of in your philosophy. Mine too. Now get this. Let's say it's been a couple of hours since the dancing bee has been to the flowers, but she still wants to tell everyone about it. She actually corrects the angle of her dance for the rotation of the earth. Melissa remembered the night she'd learned about bee dances. After their walk, they had made love, half-dressed, her green dress bunched around her waist, his hemp pants dangling from one ankle. Back in the present, on the porch, she grunted in assent and curled up tighter in her corner of the couch, drawing her knees to her chest, defending herself against Beck's dishonesty. You didn't believe me at first, Beck said. That's right, I didn't. What's your point? She snapped. If I tell you, will you keep it just between us? Where you were this summer is a secret? Her voice cracked on the last word. Humor me for a minute. He sat motionless, holding himself steady with his arms, as if a light breeze might topple him. Melissa exhaled hard and assented with a brief downward jerk of her head. Beck addressed the lawn. I woke up in the cabin the other day and I didn't know where I'd been. My brain felt foggy, like I had a bad hangover, and I had these snatches, impressions, and they were kind of terrifying, like when you wake up from a nightmare. And the whole nightmare was based on... Beck glanced at her and stopped talking. He swallowed with difficulty. My patience is blade thin right now, Melissa warned. On being a bee colony, he said in a rush, like I was inside a beehive and I was the whole colony. Thousands of workers, hundreds of drones. Go on, I'm listening. Her dinner curdled in her stomach. Beck spoke mechanically and miserably, like he was being forced at gunpoint to recite a story he hated. And larvae too, always cycling, older bees dying, larvae hatching, just like the cells in your body. I dreamed there was a voice in my head, a woman's voice narrating everything I did. I can still hear her now. Beck shuddered. You woke up from a dream you were a beehive. No, I'm telling you, it feels like I was bees, a whole bee colony. Like all I did this summer was drink nectar, collect pollen, nurse the larvae, fan the hive, take care of my queen. I was bees. Silence. Even the cicadas fell into a hush. Beck spoke softly into the night. Maybe I hit my head, and this is what it's like to have a brain injury. I mean, I guess I could have fallen off my bike or been thrown from a moving vehicle. I guess I could be imagining bees because, well, you know how I used to think about them all the time. Bee brain, right? He laughed nervously. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels real. She orders me to send out workers, cap cells, nurse the baby bees, inspect the comb for imperfections. I can feel the brush of bristly forelegs and smell the comb. I can even feel myself throwing up nectar, disgorging honey. He put a hand to his throat. I'm crazy, right? I must be nuts. Don't tell anyone. Please help me. He was gaping blindly, blank white moon cataracts in his eyes. God, he wasn't lying. He was legitimately scared. He was hearing voices. He was psychotic. Weren't there drugs to treat this kind of thing? She could take him to the walk-in clinic in Lanark, get a referral to a specialist, hunt down a diagnosis, and fix him. Melissa heard her mother's pep talk, urging her to action. We can do it, Lissy. We can run the farm on our own. And I'm just going to skip forward a couple of chapters. So claiming to have been a bee colony is very odd. And Beck's father, who's very logical and practical, takes him to be examined by doctors and a friend of his in Toronto, Barbara Beauchemin, who's a professor of physics. And one of the inspirations for Mad Honey was a 1998 Discover magazine article called Quantum Honeybees. And the character, I'll let the character Barbara Beauchemin explain a little bit about how those things came together, how it was possible, potentially, scientifically, for someone to have become a bee colony. So Beck and his father are at the University of Toronto. And this is, the little professor scuttled over to him. Her complexion was whitish gray, as was her straight shoulder-length hair. Her hand, when Beck shook it, was limp and clammy. They introduced themselves. He is Beck, she is Professor Beauchemin, and she hastened back behind her desk. Father and son settled into black leather-upholstered chairs across from her. So good to see you again, Matthew, and lovely to meet you, Beck. Time seems to roll along without mercy these days. I'm working on a documentary film, and it consumes a good deal of my stamina. How are things for you? Matthew launched into a description of life on the Organiponical. The professor listened eagerly and asked questions. Beck tried to focus on the conversation, but outside, the sun was slanting over the rooftops into the quadrangle, illuminating flowers and neatly mown grass clumped up around clover. To his amazement, Beck's eyes picked up the golden vectors of bee travel. And then he saw the bees, each individual bright as a firefly. He gaped out the window in wonder. And bees, fascinating creatures, said Matthew. Bee vectors converged on the southwest corner of the quadrangle. Could there be a hive nearby? Beck imagined he could hear the buzzing, and then he could hear it. A single worker picked her way through clover and arrived at a flower, hairy abdomen rubbing powdery pollen, bent black legs loaded with orange globs of nectar. You're a beekeeper? But how wonderful. Professor Beauchemin was addressing Beck. Flexing all the willpower he could summon, he ripped his focus from the bee. Are you interested in the navigational capabilities of the honeybee, Beck? On a quantum level? Beck stared at Barbara Beauchemin for a long moment, astonished by her ability to climb inside his thoughts. The humming of the bees blended with the sounds of traffic whizzing by and distant student voices. I don't understand what you mean by quantum level. I think it's super cool that bees use the angle of the sun to find nectar loads, he said. Let me share with you an interesting theory. It was dismissed as rubbish years ago. Over a decade ago, an American mathematician was playing with two-dimensional, he asked, setting his chin on a fist. A flag manifold. It's a six-dimensional field that mathematicians use for making hypothetical calculations. The professor turned abruptly to her desk, yanked a drawer open, located a scrap of paper and a sharp pencil, and started drawing. Mathematicians, always postulating. Barbara Beauchemin waved a miniature white hand in the air. We don't have to jump down that rabbit hole. It isn't as impenetrable as it sounds. I can draw this. She quickly drew a perfect circle and tell you to see a sphere. It's a two-dimensional representation of a ball, which is a three-dimensional object, you see? Beck nodded. Matthew frowned. A flag manifold, a six-dimensional field, looks like this on paper. She drew a hexagon. Beck spasmed at the sight of it, and she smiled. Yes, it's a honeycomb cell. Not surprising, of course, 6 sides of equal length. But the thing is, this mathematician plotted the way quarks would behave in this field. Quarks, you know what they are? They're tiny subatomic particles. And these are the shapes that emerged over and over again. The scratch of her pencil briefly. Oh, the dances, Beck exclaimed, and his father raised his eyebrows. Precisely. The professor beamed at Beck. Right answer, gold star. The mathematician who conducted this experiment didn't delve any further as far as I know. She was roundly ridiculed for this research, by the way. The scientific community reacted very harshly. But I saw the appeal of her idea. It has a lovely poetic symmetry, doesn't it? Honeycomb shapes, waggle dance shapes. It points to honeybees having some perception in a quantum dimension, a perception we humans lack or perhaps cannot yet perceive. I'm in the dark over here, said Matthew, squinting at the pencil marks. See this, Pa? This thing that looks like a coffee bean or a figure 8? Beck jabbed the paper. That's the waggle dance, essentially. That's the precise shape of it. And this small circle, that's the round dance. When the nectar is closer than about 50 meters, we use a round dance because we only need to communicate the direction of the nectar, not the distance traveled to get there. The distance is conveyed by the length of the dance in circuits. There's a tremble dance too, for when a bee is desperate to offload nectar to the hive. What she's saying is the bee dances happen in a quantum dimension, and bees use quantum physics to transmit information. Something like that, right? Something like that, Barbara Beauchemin echoed, batting purplish eyelids. You said we just now, as in the royal we. How strange. That pronoun came out of you so naturally. You identify closely with your bees, I suppose. Outside the window, bees whipped and zipped around the quadrangle. Beck wanted to ask Professor Beauchemin about the gold ribbons, the lines of energy he could see snaking around the courtyard, and the spots of concentrated light where a bee worked in a flower. But he knew how bizarre the question would sound. His dreamy hesitation lasted a moment too long. Beck, are you entirely well? The professor asked. You've gone a bit pale. Matthew sighed. Beck works on a farm. This past summer, Eurydice and I were in Cuba. When we're away, we'll go 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes even a month without hearing from our son. He takes care of the cabin for us, and there's no phone service there, so if he doesn't answer his cell phone, it's not unusual. He can't afford a new phone, and when his malfunctions, he's incommunicado. In the middle of the summer, I called the farm where he works, and they said they hadn't seen him in a month. Where were you? Barbara Beauchemin asked Beck reprovingly. I don't know. I can't remember. Telling the lie, Beck squirmed. I flew back to Ontario, Matthew continued. Our cabin was unlocked. Beck's backpack and a few of his things were in the middle of the floor. One of the beds was messed up. Really messed up. Not from sleeping, more like there'd been a fight on it. I walked the whole property, 3 acres, looking for him and calling his name. Melissa, his boss, was furious. His absence was a big inconvenience. All those beehives and no one to help her with them. My wife, Eurydice, instinctively felt her son was fine, but she was also preoccupied with caring for her father, who was undergoing various treatments for cancer. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Beck showed up at our cabin again with total amnesia. He has no recollection at all, no idea where he's been. I'm taking him to a doctor tomorrow. Hearing it matter-of-factly from his father, Beck understood for the first time how his departure had hurt Melissa. He felt a heaviness in his chest and pressure behind his eyes. He ran his hands over smooth skin on his forearms, and reassured by their solidity, he looked out at the sunny quadrangle where golden vectors converged and spiraled up toward him. A sensation he was being reincorporated into a colony, a wriggling that began in his core and spread through his torso, overwhelmed him. And Beck stood up and walked to the window, touching hot fingertips to cool glass. A shuddering spread up his arm and across his shoulders. His vision began to fragment, and then he was plunged into darkness. Professor Beauchemin had grabbed opaque curtains and swished them shut in front of Beck's face. His breath stalled between his mouth and his lungs. He staggered from the window and collapsed in one of the leather chairs with a whump. His father loomed. With his long arms hinged at knobby elbows and his round glasses, he looked like a praying mantis, head angled down, eyes bulbous. The professor pulled the chain dangling from the stained glass lamp, and electric light illuminated the room, compensating for the closed curtains. "You'd better get him to a doctor," said Professor Beauchemin.
Thank you so much, Katie. The mystery woven into this novel, you did it so incredibly well. The underlying theme, and everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Kaylee will ask on your behalf. The underlying theme in the novel seems to be, I mean, outside of addiction and grief and stuff I'd like to talk about later, is urban sprawl and the survival of the honeybee. When Beck and his father were riding to Toronto, there's a line where Beck is noticing hundreds of fallow fields full of nectar-laden native flowers, shaggy pink bee balm, spiky purple fireweed, all gone. And honeybees, as we know, it's been in the news forever, we're losing them. They're becoming extinct. Extinct is the word I couldn't think of. So I wanted to talk to you about the honeybee and whether or not all of the research that went into it and your idea about honeybees and writing a novel for them, what came first? Did the honeybees come into this story, or?
It's a great question. I've been preoccupied with honeybees since I was 18 years old. And it's a long time because I'm 54 now. But when I was 18, I went with a friend to a farm actually in Hopetown in Lanark. And our plan was to take acid and go for a walk in the woods during the day. And it was supposed to be very safe and we would stay well hydrated and not get in a vehicle. But as we were peaking or in the early afternoon, I knew there were hives there, but I'd never looked inside a traditional Langstroth hive. And my friend said, I think we should go look at the beehives. And in retrospect, it was a spectacularly bad idea. I mean, it could have gone really badly wrong. Bugs and acid, not necessarily a great mix, but it was absolutely magical. As anyone who's written about honeybees will tell you, as you get close to the hive, there's a sound, and it's not the high whine of one bee. It's this sort of, it's like the om of meditation.
Wow.
And we would suit it up. So I felt quite safe in terms of the bees weren't going to sting me. And when she opened up the top of the the hive and the bees rose up to meet us, I felt quite welcomed. I felt that sensation of being allowed to observe a wild animal.
Mhm.
Um,
That's beautiful. I can't
it
even.
was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And doing it on acid. I mean, in the novel, Mad Honey is actually this honey called Delhi Ball. And I wanted to ask you about whether or not you've tried it, whether or not you know anybody who has experienced the effects of Delhi Ball. Um, sorry, you went out. Did you hear that question?
No, if you could just repeat the question, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So speaking of acid, the mad honey in the novel is Delhi Ball, this hallucinogenic or honey with hallucinogenic properties. So I wanted to know if you've tried Delhi Ball. And I also want to know if you want to talk about your favorite kind of honey, your favorite honey.
I have not tried Delhi Ball, and the confession about the acid isn't sort of a general confession that I do hallucinogenics all the time. But um, I probably would try Delhi Ball because it sounds like an interesting experience, but I haven't. Although that did come together with the fact that that was my first experience with honeybees. And then when I heard about Delhi Ball, I went, oh, that's, seeing those bee vectors is something else that happened on that trip. I thought I could wonder if that someone could have.
Mm-hmm. I am going to, just because I'm worried about the connection, we lost a little bit of what you said. I just want to tell everybody who's watching and who's joined us today, I am sending all of the questions and answers to Katie after this, and we'll post them on our website alongside the video. So just in case anyone feels like they're missing anything.
In terms of my favorite honey, I like darker honeys.
Yeah.
What a little I'm a bit of a honey snob now. I've been since I started writing this book in 2012, and it was colony collapse disorder, the sudden loss of an entire colony of bees, which that gave me the idea for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And Melissa Makepeace losing her father, I thought I would write a parallel story to colony collapse disorder. And it seemed to me that the human equivalent of losing someone suddenly with no explanation is ghosting.
Right.
So, that loss of, you wonder, was it something I said or something I did? It's extremely emotionally damaging to be left with no explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was supposed to be a parallel to colony collapse disorder.
Yeah. And it's hard to, I almost said something that I shouldn't have said there. Underlying themes in the novel, I'm going to completely change because I didn't want to say what I wanted to say. The other underlying themes in talking about Melissa and her relationships with her mother and her foster sister and her father and Beck and everyone, Marjorie especially, is mental health, grief, and addiction and alcoholism. And that I felt all of the sort of grief, the loss was the parallel story to me. And I did feel that connection to the potential loss of honeybees and how that would impact the world as a whole, and how the loss of or the disappearance of her father affected Melissa. I thought you did that quite well. Can you talk about why it was important for you to have that parallel? Why?
Sure. I'm in recovery myself. I'm actually 11 years sober. And so that was something that was very much timed with the writing of this novel. I had always wanted to write. I'd graduated from school thinking I would be a writer. And then life just took a giant left turn and it didn't happen. And a couple of decades went by. And it was with recovery that I got back into visiting beekeepers and also back into writing. And I did lose a lot because of addiction.
Mhm.
And it, you're bang on with the reason why that's there is the grief
Mhm.
aspect of it. I feel a similar type of, um, yeah, deep regret about what's happening with nature.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I felt that, with Jill, Melissa's mother's experience and her need to find new love, to find new meaning, and Marjorie also with the incredible grief that she's experiencing and needing to find new love or a new way of expressing that love. I felt positive or optimistic that there is potential for rebirth, like the potential for starting over again and looking at things differently. The characters were incredible. You chose, which I loved, you chose to give perspective to almost every one of the characters in the novel. From chapter to chapter, we get insight into how each of them, not all of them, but how some of them are feeling. Was that a writerly decision that you made, or was that something that just naturally happened? Like you just needed to give Daphne a voice for a chapter. You just needed to give, like you just needed that perspective change.
It was a plot writerly decision because I really wanted that moment of, and we're sort of talking around it, but the aha moment in the
Hmm.
novel to be what it was. And
Right.
so in order to do that, I had to build from all these different perspectives. And so Daphne in particular, that scene grew out of another experience with honeybees, actually. I had only been exposed to European honeybees, and I
Hmm.
went to visit a friend in central Mexico, and she had a friend. Anyway, I went to visit a hive there, and they were Africanized bees. They were killer bees,
Wow.
and the whole experience was so different. We were still suited up, but when he opened the top of the hive, he said, "We can only be in here for a minute and a half tops."
Yeah.
And the bees came out. It was like a hail, them
Wow.
hitting my screen, the veil, and they were so angry. And the buzz was a very different buzz. It was like, "Get away! We don't want you here." Super aggressive. And so after that happened, I thought, no, we need to see another side of bees, because it's all I had was this very pastoral, beautiful. Oh, bees provide us with honey, but they're also a wild creature,
Yeah.
and we also are manipulating them. And
Yeah.
so that was.
Yeah, or to like taking advantage of them, right? As we've done with so many species, thinking they're not indestructible, but thinking that they're destructible, but they'll continue to go on despite our crappy behavior as humans.
Well, we are farming them, actually farming the bees, like moving them to these giant almond plantations or wherever they need to be moved. And that, yeah, it's not unsurprising that they're having the hard time that they're having.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's complex in so much as we're living in a capitalistic society that people are hanging on to for whatever reason, whether or not you're a socialist or a humanist. People are still attached to a lot of their capitalistic behaviors, and that's I don't know if that ever changes. We're not going to continue to lose species and have to evolve away from them and without them and be lesser people because of it, I think. I loved the relationship between Daphne and Melissa. Not, I have three sisters myself, but not just because they're sisters. There was a really precise relationship between them that I thought you rendered quite well. Melissa had a lot of envy for how great the relationship between Daphne and her mother Jill was. She had a lot of respect for her. She had a lot of, or let a lot of her anger and rage out on her. I thought you did it so well. And I wanted to talk about your family and how that was put into the novel.
Well, my own family.
No, just your idea of family and how important it was for you to have You know, I mean, I hate to say this because novels they want to do different things when family is important in a novel, but I just thought they existed quite well, honestly. And yeah, I guess I just want to know why you, or how easy it was for you to escape the tropes of foster sisters, I guess, that they
Um,
could have been something else.
I really wanted to explore the imperfections of family, that they're, so it was an attempt to have very different family situations. Beck's family too, where he's transplanted to all these different places and can never make any actual friend connections.
Mhm.
And so he has a hard time making friends. And Daphne's great gratitude that she has a mother, and her frustration that Melissa can't see the good in Jill.
Right.
So a lot of that came from just wanting to explore the different ways that the family can be so incredibly imperfect, and yet still at the core of it, there's love and there's gratitude for however small that relationship is.
Yeah. And I mean, talk about complex family relationships. Beck's family, his mother is a devoted follower of the Santeria religion. How was that? How did that enter the novel? Was that something you were introduced to and you thought, oh, one of these days I'm going to write a book where there's a character? Because Eurydice is so anytime she's in a scene in the book, the scene just comes alive with her faith and how her vision of the world.
So I really wanted to explore the mystery of how Beck had become bees. I thought the answer was either scientific or spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted the readers to say, well, he's got this practical father who's having him examined, but he's also got this spiritual mother, and he's had these sort of out-of-body experiences that his mother supports, saying, if you feel you could be more like a crow, or, you think you can actually empathize so much with an animal, you can actually imagine that you have been that animal.
Mm-hmm.
So science looks outside only for answers. It's very, it's been very helpful to us, but I think it's only half the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted him back to have an extraordinarily spiritual, and maybe not spiritual in North American Christian church way.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who was more of an animistic religion, an earthier religion. And Santeria came to mind because I'd done some reading on it.
Yeah. That scene, that magical scene with his father in the field, it's quite early in the novel, so I don't think it's a spoiler, but when his father has the accident and he is there, that was such a great introduction to the novel, because it really was this like, oh, it's going to be, as you say, a novel that's outside of linear thinking and the straight path, I guess, of how we think of the human experience. It was good. I think, Kaylee, there are a couple of questions. I have a couple of writerly questions, but we'll take a minute to attend to the audience's questions.
Yeah, we have a question from Pam. And Pam says, hi, Katie. I'm lucky to have read parts of this novel in progress a few years ago in Banff. Congratulations on publication. I recognize some parts from back then, but can you tell us how much the book evolved during the time since that workshop?
Oh, that's a good question.
First of all, hi, Kim. Thanks for joining us. That was
It's Pam.
Oh, that's Pam.
It's Pam from Banff.
Oh,
yep.
Hi. Pam, thank you for coming today. It has evolved quite a lot since that workshop. So we met in 2016. Pamela Ferguson and I met at this Emerging Writers Intensive workshop in Banff, and actually the ending changed after that. I had talked about the ending. The reason, the way that Beck had become bees, was it scientific or spiritual? And it was one or the other, and I'm not going to say which, but there was a third possibility. And I hadn't actually seen it. And I worked with an editor, and the editor asked me a question. And it wasn't directly a question about how Beck had become bees. It was a question about the whereabouts of another character.
Mm-hmm.
It was an innocent question. The editor said, well, where was Marjorie during all of this? And I went, oh, I know exactly where she was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like puzzle pieces falling into place. And I rewrote the ending after that workshop. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is still, it's so, I'm so worried about that. It's such a magical, all of the movement that happens towards the end of the novel is so poetic and like visually beautiful. I'm excited. I always hope that people who have read the book come to share the excitement. Maybe I should start a little like pre-Junction Reads book club. So the short stories that you've written are incredible. I read a couple of them. How did you change from, or how did you attend to this 264-page novel after having written so many short stories?
It was actually the other way around. I had a draft of this novel prior to starting writing short stories.
Oh, wow.
So I was extraordinarily impatient. So I mentioned that I'm in recovery. So I always wanted to write a novel. I jumped right in and wrote the novel, and I thought it would get published right away. And it was actually advice that I received at that same writer's workshop where I met Pam, from the moderator who asked me why I hadn't published short stories. And I said, well, because I've written a novel and I just want to write novels. And she said, well, you could really get better at writing a novel you could hone your craft by writing short stories. So she was a phenomenal teacher. And once I started writing the short stories, I found that she was right. I could work on just one aspect of a novel, just a characterization mostly, or just magical realism. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Kaylee, do we have any more questions?
Nope.
That's it. That, even though we were here for longer than usual, I feel like that went quickly. So what are you working on right now? This is another exciting question. I am always happy to hear.
I'm working on another novel.
Nice.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about it? Or is it?
It has to do with deforestation. So I'm very preoccupied with environmentalism and the natural world.
Yeah.
And I'm living out here on Cortez, and I was a tree planter for 7 years. And I wanted to write another mystery, this time set in a tree planting camp.
Oh, cool.
So, based on some actual experiences I had in Northern Ontario. I wound up planting my way all the way out west, but I was young and my most adventurous and crazy in Ontario, and I got in trouble with the law, and I wanted to bring some of that into a novel.
Wow, that's fantastic. We have a couple of tree planters in our family, one who works in Northern Ontario and one who's in Northern BC through this tree planting season. So that'll be interesting to read. Have we missed anything? Is there anything that you feel like we've missed talking about with Mad Honey?
I think you've asked some excellent questions, and you've done a great job of, I'm the worst for spoiling myself, so I want to be careful about what I say. But
I know.
No, all I'd like to say is thank you very much for reading it. And all I ever wanted since I was a little girl was to be a storyteller, and to write a book that would be entertaining and engaging.
This was very entertaining, and I love reading books. I've said this probably, if anyone's watched and joined us with this, I say all the time, I love books where I have to stop, put the book down and look stuff up. And I love the like internet wormhole that I go into sometimes. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much for giving that to us. Wolsak and Wynn has generously donated 2 copies of Mad Honey to Junction Reads. We're going to raffle one off right now, and I'm going to do some social media stuff to raffle off the other copy. And then maybe I'll email the winner and we can talk about thoughts about Mad Honey. Kaylee.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. You'd think after 3 years you'd have the whole Zoom thing down, right? But no, it's always a struggle. All right, our winner for today is Pamela Ferguson.
Oh, yay. I don't know. Pam, are you there? She is.
She's here, yeah.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I'm trying to cook at the same time.
That's
Yay,
okay.
thank you.
I think I have your mailing address. Pam and I were also in workshop together. I've known Pam since 2005.
I think so. At least.
That seemed like 1,000 years ago. Congratulations, Pam. I'm excited for you to read the final copy. If you've already read it, and I'm assuming maybe you have, you can nominate somebody else, but I'll get in touch with you. And if you want it mailed to someone else as a gift, I can do that too. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. And apologies again for the technical glitch. I feel like I spend a lot of time apologizing, and I think I should just not. Things happen and it's hard to deal with sometimes. Katie, thank you again for joining us from Cortez Island. Good luck with the home building and the learning how to be a contractor through YouTube. I'm excited to see the documentation once it's all said and done.
Thank you very much for having me, Allison and Kaylee, and it's been fantastic. And thank you for your patience with the power outages, etc., from Cortez Island.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.